This podcast is brought to you by Craft Spirits and Distilling for those who make and drink great spirits. Join our free email newsletter for technical and creative distilling stories in your inbox every week. Learn more at spiritsanddistilling.com.
Hello and welcome to the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. I'm your host, Molly Troupe, and today with me I have Olivier Ward from Everglow Spirits. Olivier has tons of experience when it comes to all things gin. He started a platform that is used world around in order to talk about gin and ingredients and everything. His newest project with Everglow Spirits is a platform that really allows makers and marketers and everyone involved with spirits production opportunity to learn more. Before we get too involved in the conversation, G&D Chillers understands that each distillery's chilling requirements are unique. On every distillery project, G&D offers the front-end design and engineering your team needs at no cost to you. Jim Kerr, VP of Manufacturing at Red Boot Beverages, says, G&D has been with us since the early days. Their knowledgeable engineers and service techs are there when we need them. We are in the midst of a large expansion, and they have been right there with us to select chiller solutions for today and the future. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com. Distill as if you're looking to perfect your craft. Meet the MPE Granulizer, a cutting-edge precision roller mill that masters every grain. Whether you're grinding corn, rye, or malted barley, this precision roller mill guarantees a consistent particle size, giving you better control over your process and flavor development. Take your distilling to the next level with technology designed for precision and efficiency. Learn more on the Modern Process Equipment website, mpechicago.com.
I would love for you to just take us on a little bit of a journey into how you got started in the spirits world.
Yeah, no problem. So I kind of fell into booze as an industry, and I was finishing university. I studied design and essentially immersive experiences in terms of designing them, creating them, building them, that kind of stuff. And pretty much fresh out of university, I managed to build a few things. And luckily, through the way the design scene works and the industry works, got a gig creating a bit of experiential, something for an experiential marketing campaign for a then little-known gin brand called Hendrix. But at the time, had been going for about 5-6 years. This is about 2007, 2008. So it existed on the market, but they had never really brought it to consumers. And I got involved with a couple of agencies as a maker, basically, and ended up making this 1890s Pullman train carriage, a cabinet of curiosities, carriage of curiosities. And and then it kind of just spiraled out of control from there, from my perspective. I was ended up making stuff for Hendrix, and then as you are, if you're the one making it and installing it, and then you end up getting a bit involved in running the event. And then if you're running the event, you're liaising with the PR companies. And then all of a sudden I was in the middle of multiple agencies as a freelancer, and then it just grew and grew and grew until I became de facto part of the team, really, that was bringing Hendrix to a new generation of gin drinkers, and at the forefront of that scene in 2007, 2008. And it was completely by happenstance, and right place, right time for me.
That's amazing. I love when that works out. Is this the start of your love affair with gin, or was it inspired by something else?
Yes and no. I think I've always, it's funny because I'm my daughter's nearly 4 years old, and I think having a kid makes you reassess some of the reasons why you're predisposed to things, or whether you think certain ways, or just a question you start asking yourself questions. And I think when it comes to what is it about gin that you love, and I think I was primed for it, is what I'm going to say. My parents both loved the gin and tonic. I used to drink tonic water. Do you know how someone would drink lemonade or Coca-Cola or whatever it is? I used to sign in for a glass of Schweppes, as the weirdo that I was as a teenager. And then obviously, my family's French, although I sound very British. So summers in the south of France is basically a resinous pine. And so clearly in the bottom of the gin and tonic is a very is flavors that are very comforting and very familiar to me. Although I wasn't a big drinker until after university days myself. But so I think the journey with Hendrix though, and what I was it was right at the beginning of the craft boom here in the UK. Sip Smith really 2009, 2008, 2009 was the sort of the start of that journey. A few years after the US, really, when you think about all of the precursors, but at the same time, it was the beginning of the craft gin scene and the craft distilling movement here in the UK. Gin in the UK was already getting popularized by that point. You think Tanqueray 10, Hendrix, beating to 24, and then all of the independents like Heyman's bringing back their old Tom. I know Ransom obviously brought back theirs as well. So gin was getting cool again, but it wasn't the thing. And I think through working on Hendrix, I was exposed to the fact that it wasn't just about flavor, and I think that's where an absolute obsession for the spirit became, because it's more about, okay, well, if you here's some fun flavors, and the minute you're over that or no longer interested in that, or it's yet another brand with yet another load of flavors, you can go, well, okay, it's also about the people who make it. It's also about the process in which it's made. It's about the place in which it has. It's about the provenance. It's about how the spirit is imbued in with these amazing ideas, and the creativity and the human touch and the maker's hand. And because of that I understood that, and that it helped me understand that. And because I was in the middle of all of this, and I was starting to write about gin as a journalist, as a blogger, people trusted me to tell their story, and they were telling me these different angles. And back in the day, there was a lot of entrepreneurial stories, right? New entrepreneur launches craft distillery, first product is gin, and then after a while, it became about other things. And I was just following these amazing stories and seeing how gin is just a vehicle for it. It's just a conduit for it. And I still see that today. And that's why I never get bored of it, because if you get bored of that, then you're bored of everything, because you're bored of people, you're bored of process, you're bored of flavor, you're bored of provenance, you're bored of place. I mean, if you're anyway curious, you will find that curiosity imbued into a bottle of gin. You just got to go looking for it and ask a question about something that's more than flavor. And yeah, and as I say, like that it just ignited a passion. And I haven't looked back.
That's amazing. And I wanted to expand a little bit about your experience as a journalist, and in particular blogging and writing about gin.
Yeah, so I started writing about gin 2008, and it was a small scene there. And the reason I started writing was actually I didn't intend to write publicly, as it was what I should point out. I am dyslexic, and I read with a ruler. And so also have been a journalistic career thereafter, and I'm very lucky to have actually had a career. And to be a paid wordsmith is a ridiculous concept to me, because of the amount of times I was told as a child, you should probably do something with your hands and make something instead. Because just reading is very difficult and very slow. So I actually started writing about gin because I thought, hey, I'm really interested in this subject, and it will help me because I can practice writing and typing and that kind of stuff on my own time. And if I started doing one a week, I thought, how naive was I, 2008, I could do 50 in a year, and that would cover the entirety of the gin category that was available here in the UK, plus a couple of weird things that I might be able to find, or friends might be able to, bootleg over from wherever holidays they might be going. So 50 was by far above and beyond the scope and width of the category. And so I started writing, and about like half a dozen in, I was showing other people just to see, hey, like, what do you think? Am I making any improvements here? And it was very a personal project. And they were like, hey, not only you should publish this, but also you're one of the very few, if not the only ones, to take a slightly different approach to reviews. Because I wasn't really writing reviews. I was writing tasting notes, but I was writing about, hey, here's the person behind it. Here's the process behind it. Here are the botanicals involved. This is what it tastes like. And this is what the brand ideation is around. So it was a very much a kind of a 360 vision review. That's how it all started. And so I published about, 10, 15 in, and yeah, I think I've written over 400 or 500 articles about gin ever since. But, and quite frankly, I barely touched the surface of what the category is about. So it's just growing out of hand is what I will say.
And from all of this material that you've produced, you've done a lot of we're not going to call them reviews, tasting notes, wonderful. Like the website itself is such a great resource for people who are making gin, for finding information about botanicals that maybe you aren't familiar with. It's hard to explore every gin in the world, and your website gives people a way to kind of see that through your eyes. But you've done a lot of like education with it as well. What's your favorite educational segment that you've produced with the Gin Foundry?
Yeah, so Gin Foundry. So when I started writing, it was called the Gin Blog, and then I essentially built my agency around working for William Grant, working on different brands, really, doing ideation for Monkey Shoulder, the whiskey, and Balvenie whiskey, and Reka vodka, and that kind of stuff, and creating identities and running social media marketing and PR and all that kind of stuff. So as an agency that I owned, we'd be working in whiskey and separately writing about gin, and all the clients were all so we kept on getting approached by gin owners, founders, that kind of stuff, saying, hey, you guys are an agency, can and you love gin, can you not just do something for us? And I kept on saying, yeah, we're an agency for someone who pays money. I don't, without being mean, like, do you know what I mean? It's like it's not pro bono. So, but that gave us the idea. And I say us, I use the word we. It's not royal we. I'm not that egocentric. My brother and I were founded Gin Foundry. The reason we founded it was and moved this blog called the Gin Blog into Gin Foundry at the time was that I'd come up with a really odd concept, and it was laughed at, and it's one of my favorite pieces of coverage I've ever got. But it says I had an idea for a gin-filled advent calendar, and no one was doing that. No one had done anything filled advent calendars. It was the first year, and it was Bobby Brown, the makeup company, was also the only. So it was us and them. It was beauty and booze, and I managed to make it happen, and then sort of essentially working with a website called Master of Malt here in the UK to produce it. And so we had this product coming out the back of it. This product that we would, as an agency, kind of rep and push and create once a year on the side of this blog. And then all of these people approaching us saying, can you do something for us? And we had this concept for Junipalooza, which is a gin event, and it is held in London. And then we ended up having one in London every year and one in Melbourne, about 3,000 consumers showing up to each show, 60 brands at its peak. We also had spin-offs in Hamburg, Sydney, and elsewhere. So, because we had this product, we had this essentially event that we knew how to put on, and we could be a hub for others to find out, just as they were online, finding out about these gins, reading these reviews, maybe even buying a calendar that had multiple products in there, each on an even footing and an even bottle, so that they could just compare and contrast. And then now we had the same in physical manifestation of that same concept. So it's the same concept 3 times, right? Mm-hmm. A discovery, a platform, an area where everyone was being treated. It doesn't matter your budget. I don't care if you're Beefeater or if you're Tanqueray or if you're Herno Gin or if you're Tarquin's from Cornwall. And he showed, like, just as an example to Junipalooza, the first year he showed up, he packed the entire distillery in the back of his car. It was full cases in a pallet. And I remember I was like, you didn't need to bring the pallet, mate. We have, there's plenty around. He was just like, I didn't know what to expect. And so, now it's an enormous global brand. Fantastic, good for him. And it's just it was the beginning of the journey. But it was the same concept, educationally speaking, it was the same concept. Can I provide an equal footing, a fair footing, an independent one, in which people can, in their own time, whether they want to read, whether they want to purchase, or whether they want to just experience and taste or meet the maker, whatever it might be, that is it. And so I'm, from a Gin Foundry perspective, that's what I'm most proud of, for sure, mm-hmm. because again, no one was really doing it back then. And even in other categories, and even if you look at it today, they're few and far between where you get these truly, you should say, fan first gatherings, websites, product collections, where really it's about the discovery element of it. And that played such a big part from a gin category perspective, because quite frankly, the gin category was exploding and people really wanted to understand more about it and find their way within it. Anyway, that lasted from 2012 through to 2020, at which point we sold Gin Foundry to a wholesaler here in the UK called Inotri & Co, who bought it, and with the plan was to do more and bigger and better. Obviously, COVID had a different idea for that plan, but yeah.
COVID, man, just killing plans and dreams.
Yeah, what it did, it took us on a tangent, right? So it sucked on every level. So we just created the deal of a lifetime, exit as founders. We were super happy with the partner that we had, because at the time we'd added this, the gin kiosk, it was called at the time. So we had a D2C arm in which we were selling, hundreds of thousands of pounds of gin every quarter. And so it was this beautiful, this nerdy gin focused thing. And they saw it, they understood it, and they said they acquired us for that reason, in order to grow it and grow it internationally. And then, because of they're a huge wholesaler here, they turn over just over about 200 million pounds, just for context. They're wine and spirits, UK centric, predominantly in the wholesale channel, but on the basis that they had just acquired D2C capacity and a team of nerds who just love spirits of all forms, in particular gin. They said, look, I know what the plan was, but how about you just do the same thing, but pan spirits as opposed to gin only, and help us basically as a wholesaler go D2C, not just business to business, at a time where, let's face it, business to business wasn't happening at all. So
right,
it changed, and then it changed it, and again, that's the shame with Gin Foundry we changed it to the new project became Spirits Beacon, Spirits Kiosk, because I didn't want to I didn't want to change the ethos on what we'd built over a decade. And there were also products that I see pop up everywhere, things like the botanical tasting wheel, for example, which is just people can Google it. It's on Everglow Spirits now. The PDF's available for download. I've made it free now, but that's a product I was super pleased and proud about. I didn't want to, if you're going to change something radically and change the ethos and change the ownership, I feel like, put a full stop at the end of it, as opposed to, and then it became something else.
So I think that it's really interesting context too, because your guys' direct to consumer is far different experience than it is here in the US. Can you expand a little bit on what the DTC looks like for the UK? Yeah,
not just for the UK, but for the rest of the world. I think if you were,
yes, just not us.
It's you guys are flying solo there. And I know that as a producer and having listened to to Christian and to Adam at Quantico, and obviously aviation on previously on the pod and your previous interviews, I know everyone has to be diplomatic, and I know that there are vested interests, and I know that everyone is keen on a collegiate and a constructive dialogue. But let me just say, as the outsider looking in, it is absolute madness. The fact that you're not allowed D2C from, and let alone digital, given what wine's achieved, given what the rest of the world has achieved, given we're 2024. I mean, gosh, you know what I mean? It's such a dampener for the industry. And as I say, I get that everyone has to be constructive, and I come to a conclusion, but it's hard from my perspective. Look, I've helped so many distillers get best products online for themselves and still see them succeed in the wholesale channel. I've taken a wholesaler and 2,000 SKUs that they have and put their D2C and see them operate both in tandem, and use the information from a D2C perspective, the data saying who's buying, how much are they buying, what are they going on, what are they clicking out, what are they interested in, what products are working. At the end of the chain, okay, cool, we should probably stock up on more, because we know that the bars, the retailers, the independents, whoever it's going to be, they're going to be, you can see where the supply is going to be needed from the data that you get. And Yeah, so whether you're a producer, say here in the UK, yes, a producer can sell direct out of the cellar door or online. That creates problems of its own in terms of how competitive everything is. It is a competitive world in order to make a sale because it's super saturated. But for context, I mean, you can buy booze on Amazon and it arrives the next day. Do you know what I mean?
My favorite thing.
Yeah. So it's like we're actually now a really important retailer from a spirits perspective, just by sheer volume, because people are going there for convenience and they're just going, right, well, I bought a pair of socks, I might as well add a bottle of whiskey, or whatever it might be. But no, the rest of the world has seen not just D2C, the ability to sell direct, online, or cellar door as a hugely positive thing, not just for the industry, not just for the craft industry, but for the entire chain, right? As retailers, we work with, I've been on each side of the equation, wholesale, retail, independent brand, and it's so positive to have that data. Without data, it's just an opinion. Right. I think you've really got to come back to that once you have the data, and that's what D2C allows you. And yeah, so I've gone on a complete tangent and a little bit of a rant there, but like, and I apologize, but it's so maddening because I see so many fantastic brands in the US with really limited distribution and a wholesale sector that is exactly like ours in the UK, by the way, no different. It's really hard to get products through and down the line. And the wholesalers really struggling with who should I take, who should I not? And on top of that, they have a tail of products that they need to get rid of, but they can't quite push on it's an oil system that kind of used to work top down. And since the craft movement started 20 years ago, the system has been creaking because that top-down approach doesn't work for craft and for craft distillers. D2C provides a lot of options for both the wholesale sector to engage with them themselves, as well as a lot of data that can help inform them make a better decision on who they purchase, who they back, and in what quantities they should be stocked. Equally, it's phenomenal in terms of building up a new clientele and reaching the end consumer. And people wonder why, people aren't picking me up in store. Well, do they know about you? No. Well, digital advertising. Yeah, but how do I know who to do that to and where my ROI is going to be affected? And again, if you start having the capacity to do direct sales, you start building the ability to help. It helps retailers as well. It sounds like it's going to be competitive, but my experience of it has been, and both here in Australia, in South Africa, across Europe, by the way, as well, like in terms of helping Italian brands and working with Maison de Whisky and other people in France, the experience is universal. It is positive. And if you're tearing your hair out as an American producer, know that I am bald. And that is because that's partly because I have been tearing it out with you. I don't understand.
Yeah, I am so happy to hear your rant. I love it, and I also want to point out that I did not say any of that. Does it mean I don't fully stand with it? I absolutely do, but yes.
Exactly. That's it. You've got to draw a line under it, and fair enough. As everyone's in a constructive dialogue to move forward, I would just say that the positives outweigh any possible concern that you might have. And all of the concerns that have been levied as to why the reasons why it can't exist have been disproven in multiple countries around the world, pretty universally and systematically, be it from underage deliveries through to increasing drunken, the whole spectrum. But as someone who's just worked in the wholesale sector for the past 4 years, as the wholesaler, we made far more money having data from D2C and making more informed purchasing decisions than we did without it. And that's a really important thing to remember. It is good for the wholesalers. They've just got to be brave and jump.
And I have my fingers crossed that there is a wholesaler listening right now who's going to take this and be inspired. So let's hope for change, because that would be amazing. Let's talk a little bit about some of your more recent projects, if you would.
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, since Gin Fenrir sold to Did Not Drink, we've ended up being doing the same thing but Pan Spirits. And then in the past year, I was released from that contract, which is great. So having spent 3 years essentially on continuance of the business, making sure it was supported and making sure that they had bought what they thought they had bought and worked through it. My brother and I were told we were released, and we then spent another year working with them because it's a big happy place. We all liked working on it. And then so since the beginning of this year, I've started this project called Everglow Spirits, and it's a platform that's much more aimed towards distilleries and distillers, and just helping people make better booze for starters. But the question always comes up, like, help how? Well, make it better in terms of increasing quality, saving time, saving cash, making it safer, making it more efficiently. And so it just tackles from with the same kind of ethos, which is pay it forward. A lot of it is open for anyone to read. There's over 150 articles now on that website through the Everglow Spirits Academy, and that tackles it three different prongs, right? So operations, the how and why of how you would go about fermenting, or raw material input of molasses, or how you would go about doing a multi-shot botanical recipe, or just how, why, what's going on, that kind of stuff from an operations perspective. I do the same thing from just a general spirits category. As a journalist, take this is what Old Tom Gin is. This is what the laws around Scotch whiskey are. This is what cognac in production is about. So trying to explain it to people. And then the third prong is marketing and brand. Essentially, how to build better businesses, because over the past 14 years, that's been a pretty big part of my life as a consultant. Just going into businesses, going, hey, your operations are fine. You don't need any problem. There's no problem there. Your problem is in your route to market, or in your price strategy, or in your commercials. Let's work it out, and let's work on that. So I'm putting a lot of that knowledge and understanding and insight onto the website and through the courses that we offer.
I think it's really interesting from to have all those prongs. It's something that I imagine operators, or people who get into it from the operations side, production side, can see that and see very familiar information, data, can gather maybe some new stuff as well. But those are not always the people who are also concerned about sales and marketing, which really everyone should be. So it's kind of fun to have all of that information there. I'm curious about, from a sales and marketing perspective, is there a mistake that you see brands making, multiple brands, that just really drive you crazy?
Yeah, loads. And to your point about, if you're in operations, it's you'll see familiar stuff in terms of that you could get. So, but a lot of it isn't aimed at the craft sector, or a lot of it, globally speaking, the US is actually much better at having courses aimed at the craft sector. Here in Europe, you have the big institutions like WSET or IBD or something like that, whom you really tailor towards big operations with a lot of staff, and assume that the person doing the malting isn't the person doing the distilling, who isn't the person also taking delivery, who isn't the person doing the taste at the end of the road. And from my experience in the craft sector, that is very much usually one person with several hats at any given point. And so I think that to answer your question, I'm not dodging that question. I'm just trying to sort of give you the context as to why. That's why I put all of those three things together, and each time I really try and sit down with people and understand their pain points and go, right, well, how can I save you time, save you money, and avoid the big mistakes? It's often in that integration where they haven't fully understood how one impacts the other, because they're the operator that hasn't understood the commercials of reality to much, or they're the owner-founder that actually wants a certain price point but hasn't realized really where the supply chain doesn't facilitate that, or whether, or they're a marketer who's selling a brand and selling a story, but actually hasn't taken the time to build that authenticity from more raw material intake upwards, right? Differentiation is the sum of many parts. It's not just something that you can stick on a label and put some smart copy on. That's just disingenuous. So you've got that's the big area that I think it's not necessarily a mistake, but it's a lack of cohesion.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that can lead to that can just lead to a lot of friction in a lot of businesses where they're not necessarily doing anything wrong, but because they're not all actually working towards the same ideal. And a good example of that is having a house style. So brandy, whiskey. A lot of people just, what are you known for? What is your house style? What are you trying to make as a spirit? And they really struggle to define that. And you're going like, that's mad. How do you optimize anything unless you've defined what you're trying to do? What's your end destination? And then you work towards that place. And you're finding that actually, if you ask that same question, what is it you're trying to do? What is your end destination? Why are you doing this? Why are you here? What is your USP? And you ask different people in that same organization, they'll give you slight variations on it and they're not sure. And with that lack of clarity comes just a lack of growth. And yeah, let's say friction. And so it's not necessarily a mistake. It's just sometimes you're just, because these processes in the build phase, certainly with the crafted sector and all across the world, this is universal. I promise you that. I was looking at the series just outside Melbourne, and then today I've literally come back to this for the sake of just context for listeners. We're recording this in the evening, and I've just been at an English whiskey distillery today, and I asked that question, to them. What's your point of difference? What are you making? Why are you here? And I asked that to 5 or 6 of the guys working there, and across it, and they all gave me about 4 or 5 different answers, and I'm just like, well, it's going to be a problem because there's no singular message. And yeah, and again, none of them are ill-intentioned. It's just sometimes you focus so much on your supply chain, and then, all right, that's sorted, I'm going to go to the next bit. People don't take that moment to get a bit of perspective. Did what I just say make sense? Did what I just do all dovetail together? And it's that moment where you take a step back, look at it. All right, that fits, and there is the error.
Well, you've had this perspective of having been in the industry for so long too, of seeing really the beginning of the craft movement, and kind of, I'm going to just say pretty bluntly, the low bar of entry, where you could just be having really good spirits and people would support you potentially because you were novel at that time. And now we're in this very competitive market where, we have to grow and expand and have all this other stuff, all the storytelling, the branding, everything should be on point, because it ultimately, like, if you don't have that element to your business, you're not going to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely, without doubt. And it's almost unfair when you think about it, right? I would point out that the US is slightly easier in that respect than the rest of the world. And you might not think that from a US perspective, producer's perspective. But it is, I promise you that. The state-by-state system in the US means that really, if you're a Californian brand, you're only competing against, a couple of hundred, which is going to seem obscene because it's a couple of hundred. And as you just pointed out, you need to be at this insane bar on day one, which was completely unobtainable 10 years ago. Case in point, the place that I went to today, I think had that distillery been live in 2014, I would have been shouting their name and saying, this is amazing, this is the best thing I've ever seen. And today I'm looking around going, I think you're going to struggle. And there's nothing they've done an amazingly good job. Just, as you say, the bar's gone up. But in the US, the state-by-state system means you only have a couple of hundred competitors. Compare that to Australia, where, there's close to 800 distilleries. On day one, you are competitive with 800 distilleries because guess what? D2C exists. If you're in the UK, there's just over 800 distilleries here. There's 1,600 brands operational because of the third-party contractors and the internationals that have multiple SKUs and the importers and that kind of stuff. So day one, you are compared with If you were in the gin sector, for example, about 1,500 brands.
Oh,
so it's not a couple of hundred. So even you're just there going like, this is ridiculous. And as you say, to stand out, you have to have all of these other things, and that's really tough. And I would say that that's an area that new entries to market and even craft distillers in their first 3 years are learning the hard way, which is to say that marketing and differentiation is more important than they would ever have considered beforehand, where you just think, I need to make great liquid and the quality of it will stand. And yes, of course I got to get my price point reasonable, but the quality will carry me through. And that might have been true 15 years ago, but that is absolutely not true at all anymore. And it's not to say the quality doesn't matter. Of course it matters, but to convert that first sale, to create that momentum, to create that, wow, the bar has gone so far higher than what we have. And I guess bizarrely slightly easier in the US market, even though it doesn't feel that way. And another example, a visual example for those who don't believe me, thinking, Olivier, clearly, sounding all British and the foreigner commenting on the US scene, clearly you're not here. It is ultra competitive. Oh, I believe you. Don't get me wrong, but the numerically comparison, statistically, I'm saying it's a slightly easier. But also, look, just take gin as a category, right? And if you had to do, let's just say you and I sat down to do the top 100 gin brands in the UK, and we disagreed on a few, and we ended up with 150. All right, fine. Let's have 150. About 85, 90 of those, 150, probably even 100. I would almost go 2/3 have a custom bottle, bespoke mold just for them, right? And that look on shelf and that aesthetic on shelf. I mean, wow, 10 to 15 years ago, imagine having a bespoke model. That was, I know that's something that from a freedom perspective, that's something you achieved, but it was few and far between. Mm-hmm. And still in the US market, it's few and far between, to be honest with you. But actually, globally speaking, Australian gin, UK gin, South Africa, a lot of the stuff coming out of Latin America right now, they're going bespoke as a way to stand out on shelf from day one. Yeah. Now, that's insane to think that. And just imagine the investment level. Mm-hmm. You got to go, that's minimum order quantities, minimum timeline. Okay, then you've got mold costs. Then you've got, wow, it's not just the bar that's gone higher. The cash for entry requirement going into it is just phenomenal. And which is why it kind of surprised me that you get so many who try and launch a distillery kind of knowing that there's that expression, you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. You don't know what you don't know. But now you really can't afford to not have fewer holes in your operation before you get started. You really do need to figure out a little bit more than what you thought you had. And same thing when you're going, this idea of, I don't have any industry experience and I'm going to MacGyver my way through this and build something that's going to be okay. That might have got you to the start, fine, but it won't get you past year 3 or year 4 because you need to have this constant growth mindset, this constant learning, this constant pursuit of better, because that bar is continuously escalating upwards. And if you're not in the pursuit of those incremental gains, marketing, operations, financials, whatever it might be, you're not going to be in this game in the next 5 years. And that mindset is something that's a little bit new to it's not new to the top echelon of the craft industry, but it's something that I think you're seeing a lot more embrace much more readily, going, evolve or tap out.
Right. I think, even 4 years ago, I know that there is distilleries and producers, myself included, joking about how spirits are recession proof, but right now we're also seeing, some pretty, either like market is flat or there's some significant declines too. So bear that in mind. Like you mentioned, there is a huge barrier to entry from a financial standpoint and everything else as well. Like, it's just not saying don't start your distillery, but saying know what you're doing, know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, I've been so one of the courses on Everglow Spirits is how to open a gin distillery, and I've been running that in person for 10 years. And the thing I'm most proud about that is my strike rate is 4 out of 5 people who go on that course don't start a gin distillery. And it sounds awful to say that. It's like, look, if you're going to do it, here's all of the things that you're going to have to consider. And I was once told, like, if you really want to open a restaurant, don't. But if you really, 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 really have to open a restaurant because you're just compelled to do it, all right, let's talk after that. And I think it's the same thing. Any craft distillery is like that now, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've really got to go eyes open. And as you say, the headwinds are strong. A double-digit decline in some key categories. And when you're seeing the likes of Chivas and Diageo and Bacardi and that lot post was at the time of recording today's news, Pernod Ricard posted minus 26% for the first half of the year, right? And that they know what they're doing, and that's what people misunderstand how the big boys are. They really do know what they're doing. They are very clever people. They're actually very good at what they do. They actually have good products. I know for those of us who champion the craft sector, we don't like to admit that often, but goddamn, they're good. They're really, really good at what they do. And I wish they set this. And if they're struggling, it's hard work. It's hard work.
Let's talk about something more fun than the decline. I think what we were, before we started recording, we were briefly talking about some larger differences between the U.S. market and the rest of the world, and mostly just in the gin category, and how gin is made over here, a lot of the tasting profiles over in the U.S., and how that all differs throughout the world, really.
Yeah, it is noticeably different, and on a few levels. Commonalities in terms of what I would say are different from. You could break it down if you want, really, from a making and operations perspective. US distillers tend to have bigger units, as in stills. So if you compare that to Australian market, South African market, UK market, where 500 liters, so that's 130, 140 odd gallons, something like that, is a really big still. That's a really big still whereas in the US market, that's quite a puny operation. Do you know what I mean? So, and so because of that, this idea of multi-shot recipes are less frequent things to see in the US market than they are elsewhere. So multi-shot, in terms of, I would say just Google it, go on over. So I don't want to get bogged down in the details of that, but that is operationally speaking, a very different way of making gin. One of the things that we're seeing really from the use of this move away from classicism, juniper forward profiles, is what I'm going to call it, and to more contemporary flavor profiles. Yes, the US really does favor more contemporary, I should say less juniper forward on the whole, whether it favors it or not. That's what you tend to find as a trend, as a if you had to like put your finger on a few things, that is definitely something you find more often than elsewhere. Certainly in Europe. I'd point out that US gins tend to be higher in ABV than anywhere else in the world on average. You guys have fantastic tax. It's amazing. It's just something I'm envious of. If you go to the Australian market, it's Australian dollars, but it's 103 Australian dollars per litre of alcohol. It's a scandal.
It's gross.
I know. So we're about 55 US bucks per litre here in the US, in the UK. Don't even get going in Singapore, Hong Kong, and places like that. That's just, it'll make you want to cry. But, so because of that, this idea of being a 46, 47 ABV gin, percent ABV gin is a distant dream, commercially speaking, quite a big decision to make for European makers and for Australian makers. Same thing across Asia. Again, that's a taxation thing, but that means that a higher proof spirit tends to be true for a lot of American gin. I would say that the way that you consume it in the US also dictates preferences, for be it on flavor profiles, be it so you tend to like Negronis, martinis, not I should say spirit forward drinks tend to be much more common than the heavy reliance on the gin and tonic that we find here in Europe, especially in Spain and Italy and the UK, where really for a long time, Spain had a gin and tonic boom in which gin was doing well because of the gin and tonic. It wasn't really a gin boom, it was a gin and tonic boom. And everyone was like, Spanish are going nuts for gin. It's like, and tonic. I think you better get that little word, and tonic, and tonic. That hasn't really happened to the same degree in the US. So because of that, that point of consumption is slightly different. In terms of, for those, if you're just wondering, just like, where am I getting this data? What is this anecdote? Again, if you don't have data, it's just an opinion. I would say yes, it is an opinion, but I'm one of those people in a weirdly privileged position to taste anywhere between 800 and 1,000 gins a year comfortably between all of the spirit competitions and that kind of stuff. So I really do have fly after fly in front of my face most days, and I train very specifically to be able to detect botanical nuance, and in the road to that that goes through 400-500 different individual botanical distillers in order to assess them and to be able to better discern them once they're in the mix. But that's kind of why my opinion on US gin. But I would point out that base spirit is also another one that the fact that a lot of American producers actually make their own base spirit. In Europe, that's very uncommon, partly because of this idea of the regulations here state that you have to be 96.2 ABV as your base spirit, and that's really hard to achieve that. Obviously in the US it's 95, and in that 1.2 is a world of difference. So that's regulation prohibitive. But then you go to other markets like Asia or Australia, and you'll find a lot more commonality in the frequency that you'll see someone make their own base spirit elsewhere. So that's a Europe versus USA. I think those are the big ones. But have you noticed anything that's wildly different from your perspective?
I agree with a lot of the points that you're making. And as you were speaking, I was like thinking about the why behind this. Why is contemporary gin more predominant in America and some other markets as well versus in the UK? And I think a lot of it too is like the culture around it that you grew up with. Like, I don't think there historically was a large gin. Like when I was growing up, when people 20, 30 years my senior were growing up, there wasn't a huge like gin marketplace. It was, there's still the jokes about bathtub gin, and making gin in the bathtub during Prohibition. And I've been in sales situations where you're trying to give people samples, and I'd get downright refused, and multiple times heard stories about having college kids having experience with gin where they would fell through glass shower doors. I heard that story at least twice. That story should not be told once. Like that, it happened to multiple people. I'm like, it's a really interesting from where gin was to where it's growing now, but to kind of like introduce people to it. And a lot of people, like when you're asking, why don't you want to try this? They're like, oh, it tastes like trees, right? And that's the biggest thing they don't want to try it. The biggest reason they don't want to try it is because they don't think it'll taste very good. And so then you go this whole, well, if we can do a contemporary and it still has that juniper note, that's the tree note, and you can introduce some other flavors in there, maybe it'll be more palatable. And it's like, it's the gateway gin, right? You're getting people more introduced, and then they end up liking the Navy strain, they end up liking the London dry style, and they explore the category more. But it's kind of oftentimes, I think, just the way to get some new customers, someone to try something they maybe necessarily wouldn't have before.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, look, gin would not be the global phenomena that it is now, 10, 15 years on into the craft movement, had it not been for a progressive attitude towards the idea of juniper predominance. Now, people can hate on that as much as they want, but that is the reality. You think the big names that really opened up that gateway, they were the big boys, that's so it's not even, so people go, oh, the craft sector chose to do X, Y, and Z. Hendrix opened that contemporary conversation. Martin Millers opened that contemporary conversation. Tanqueray 10 opened that contemporary conversation. So the door was opened in 2001. So it's not even a past 5-10 years thing, so it's 1998 for Martin Millers as well. But, it's been a long time coming. And for sure, the success of the category has been this idea of a flexible scale of how predominant juniper is. And the fact that that's been accepted, hotly debated over the years, of course, and rightly so, because you don't want to lose sight of the heritage of what the category is and what it stands for. I got to say, TTB regs versus EU regulations are different. Both of them state it in slightly different ways. I would point out that the fact that the TTB doesn't specify the type of juniper that's mind blowing to me. As in the very specific, you distill with juniper communis, fine. Go and do that with a completely different varietal, which is happening all across Latin America. It's happening all across Asia right now. Still juniper. Does it taste anything like communist in terms of that resinous pine tree note? No. Some of them are grassy as hell. And so, and they're like, yeah, but this is just juniper. And you're like, yeah, but it's, we call that cedar, or we call that completely different plants. Do you know what I mean? We know it as some, anyway, so there's the flexibility has been the key to category success. I say that knowing the controversy of that comment, and look, I'm a purist at heart. I wish people would make not just classic gin, but classic gin to a London dry spec. The US and American commentators often use London dry as a byword for classicism. They are not one and the same. I would point out that London dry is a process, and a process and a way of making gin through very stringent criteria. Like there is actual distillation criteria that you need to hit in order to make a London dry gin. It's not just the fact that it's juniper forward. But I get it. It's a byword for classicism as well, because a lot of London dries tend to be classic and juniper forward and whatnot. But it has been abused. This idea of flexibility, flavored gin is a huge thing, and less so in the US. But and it's unfortunate. It's a big reason as to why gin is crashing hard in the UK and Spanish markets right now. Because it's been so popular, but really it was never gin to begin with. Raspberry gin, strawberry gin, pink gin. Pink isn't a flavor, and yet it's all over bottles, right? So it's just like, what do you mean by it's a pink gin? It's like, I don't know. I've put these several whatever it is into it, and then you're surprised that the consumer 2 years on is, I don't want that anymore. Do you want my London dry? No. Because they're nothing to do with the same. So it's been this amazing gateway. The contemporary sector has been this amazing gateway, and then flavored gin has been its own little thing on the side. But there are areas in which that flexibility has also brought on new styles that didn't even exist in the category 20 years ago. So one of the things I think would be incredibly popular in the US, flavor-wise and authenticity-wise, and from a production perspective, I could really see it working in certain wine regions, is the phenomenon of grape-infused gins that's happened in the Australia. Right, you look at Bloody Shiraz gin, but Bloody Shiraz gin is now considered a style. It was just once a product. Cam Mackenzie at Four Pillars invented it, and now there's Pinot Noir infusions, there's Chardonnay infusions, there's all sorts of, and they're fantastic. They're delicious, absolutely delicious, and. Maybe 15 years ago, it would have been, heresy to even consider doing that. But there was a bit of flexibility, and actually, what do you taste? You taste gin with the fruity touch, and so you can make something authentic and quite far out there now, whilst also staying true to the category. And I like that. It's harder as a commentator to say, well, what is gin now? Because so many things. But that's also the amazing thing. It's why people like me can stay interested in and just never find an end to something what's new.
You have this really unique perspective too. You're a chief judge for the International Wine and Spirits competition, or chief gin judge. You might be a chief judge in general. I'm not sure how they structure it, but my point is you are seeing a lot of different gins for one, but you're also seeing how people are categorizing their own spirits to an extent.
Yeah.
And I think that's, from my perspective, having produced things that are contemporary, things that I've thought are borderline, like you guys have a lot of different categories available for gin in itself, but like what kind of words of wisdom do you have to offer to someone who is like thinking about entering and they're debating where to put their gin stylistically?
Yeah, it's a really tough one. It's a really good question because, so I'm the head of I head up the gin team, which is the head of gin at the IWSC. I'm part of their senior judging committee. So there's 6 in the senior judging committee, and gin is what I get for all my sins. I've tried to make it simpler over the past 2 years. I again talk about London Dry. I faced a little bit of a backlash this year for taking that out of the entry requirements. We now put it classic contemporary flavored, and what we really mean there is a spectrum of juniper forward to say looser as you go down. When you're entering any competition, look at how they've phrased it, right? So what have they phrased and what is their requirements from an IWSE perspective? I say we put, look, this is what we mean by classic, and we put a definition next to classicism and what that means, and versus contemporary versus flavored. I think it's a lot harder when people put the word London Dry, because you can have a very citrus forward London Dry gin. That's absolutely fine because it's London Dry is a production method. So if you've really got to clarify with them on that term, do you mean a byword for classicism traditional juniper forward dry gin that would otherwise have a clean base spirit and use perhaps dry botanicals over an abundance of fresh one? That's what you mean by classic gin. If that's what you mean by London Dry, don't call it London Dry. But that's because it doesn't have to be that. You can make London Dry gins with botanical. And anyway, there's clarify their terms is my first point. The second is I'm one of these people who's obsessed by end use and by outcome. I'm quite outcome focused, be it with clients. How do I save you time? How do I save you money? How do I whatever? How do I help you move through? Or whether it's just with what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to what is the best thing for my outcome here? What do you want to get out of this from a competition perspective? Right? If you're looking to go, I want ideally a gold please, or a gold outstanding, or a double gold, or a platinum, whatever the thing is. Okay, fine, put that aside. But if you're looking for feedback, and you're not sure, right? So you maybe either not sure it's classic or something like that. You might take a gamble and put it in there, and then if you know that they give good feedback notes, and most competitions do now, and it's a big part of judging and judging criteria now is and how to be a judge and all that kind of stuff. Ask some questions like, look, I think I'm this, and I'd be willing to hear the feedback, right? But that might come at the risk. If feedback is your desired outcome, you can take the risk of not necessarily getting a better medal because, it lacked the classicism involved to get a gold in that genre. Had it been placed in something else, it might have scored higher, but then you would have got a feedback that you kind of knew already about. Do you see what I mean? So so figure out what your outcome is. Am I chasing the medal? In which case I really need to optimize around the terminology that they're using and the direction that they're giving. Sometimes it's just about, look, I would like as maximum feedback, and this is what I think is appropriate. And with some competitions, you can literally caveat that. So and say that to them. Say, please, just you help me. For IWSC, it's about 1,000 gins every year, all right? And sometimes more, sometimes slightly less. But the triage ahead of that is brutal. And because you don't get placed, and this is the same thing with the big competitions. And I know someone who's flying at WSC flag, yes, it's unique, yes, it's different, all that kind of stuff. But I'm not internal to them, so I'm quite happy to say that others do this too. The way that the flights are structured is totally done blind, so the judge doesn't ever see it, but there is logic to it. Do you know what I mean? So when the people who are organizing it and putting those flight sequences together, they're looking and reading labels, they're looking and reading, assessing, and going, hang on a minute, this is pink, why is it in London Dry? Or this is hang on a minute, and they look at it and they go, And so there's often the opportunity to talk to the organizer, is what I'm trying to say to you in a really long-winded way.
Right.
To say, have I placed this in the right place? And my ideal outcome is this. Where would you suggest I place it given what my ideal outcome is?
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll get closer to it than otherwise. But depending on who you're at, which competitions you're on. So for example, IWSC, at a table, for example, if we're coming across something that is clearly, let's just say, a flavored gin, but it's been put in contemporary, and we'd go like, look, this wouldn't get a medal, or this would get a scrape a bronze if it did. But if in this, as we did, but we're all in agreement that it's if it would be a flavored gin, it would have scored higher. And we literally mark it like that. We go, look, if the producer, and that's the feedback to producer. It's like, look, dude, you either got nothing or a bronze because it's considered X, and here's the feedback reason for it. Had you entered it into this category, this is the same feedback, the same tasting note, but you would have scored higher. Maybe you should accept that your product is that and not this. And that's great learnings. And so you judge what's in the glass as opposed to, and try and help people. And I don't know what other competitions are like, but we certainly try and do that as a team to go, all right, that's valuable feedback. And if they're willing to take it, maybe it'll be all the better for it.
I think that's amazing feedback. And I'm not sure that there's a lot of other competitions doing that, but definitely, I think that universally should, because it helps everyone and encourages people to, submit products for just feedback versus medals. Feedback's always great. We get very blind to our own products, and, and then also, have the motivation to enter again the next year in a new category if needed.
And the thing is, things change as well, right? Mm-hmm. So contemporary gin, as you know it in the US, it is changing, but everyone's kind of got a handle on it in some way or another. Look at the Asian market over the past 3-4 years. Wow. I mean, it's by far the most dynamic and interesting area for gin as a category right now, not just in terms of the flavors that they're bringing in and the journeys and sequences and botanical integration, the use of base spirits, whether they're distilling less, and how that either jars or complements and enhances the botanical sequence and journey that you have and the nuance that you can get. It's such a broad spectrum now. So that you might think, look, I'm mainstream classic gin in the US. Go to an international competition, you realize, actually, no, dude, you're far on the contemporary sector, because classicism elsewhere and around the world is judged by a different yardstick. Yeah. And so sometimes that's also worth understanding, to go, and that's the difference between a national or a local competition versus an international one, where you enter and you actually understand, well, globally speaking, that's how I'm going to be perceived. And therefore, if I'm looking at export markets, or if I'm looking at present myself in a certain way, that's valuable feedback to learn that what I think is, I don't know, mainstream juniper forward is actually incredibly light in comparison to what the local market has, or, what I thought was spicy, or what I thought was, citrus forward is not that unique compared to what their offerings are over there. And then you can start, from there's a difference between international and national competitions in that regard as well. And it is useful to be benchmarked sometimes against that international competition. But equally, you've also got to understand that the feedback is given with that in mind. And that's often sometimes where the disagreement between, well, what do you mean you tasted all of this? And that's not my understanding of how I sit in the category. Most people's understanding of the category, if we're really being honest, how many gins have you tasted this year? Right? How many gins have you tasted this year? And most producers won't be over 100. Right?
Yeah.
They'll taste their gin thousands of times. How many other brands have you tasted? All right. Well, guess what? Over 2 weeks, we're exposed to 1,000 gins in which all of them get debated. So it's a certain, and from all over the world, and stylistically, there's a huge difference there when you're getting it. And I would just put that back into the world from a producer perspective. Please understand that feedback is often given with that in mind. And so sometimes when things aren't as unique as you think they're really unique, and actually judges come back and go, it's quite mainstream, and it could be quite upsetting to hear that. But often on international competition, well, if yours is oranges and lemons, you compare that with, there's 19 other citruses that are out, and I'm in a room with my own personal home here, but I've got something like a good 50 odd samples here. At least 19 to 20 different types of citrus varieties are represented between them. All right, so they might not be that common to your local area, but so let's say that wider perspective is worth keeping in mind.
I love that, and I think that this has been so fun to talk about, Jen, from like a very, very broad context, and and very valuable insight for people in the U.S. market, but really anywhere. I just want to make sure to say thank you for your time. I really appreciate you being on the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. Can you tell people one more time where they can find more information about you and what you're currently doing?
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I literally love talking about gin, and I love always, just comparing notes and yes, spreading the gin word. But for that, and more than just gin, across all spirits, Everglow Spirits is the platform on which I write all of the content for. There's a lot of articles about all sorts of different things in terms of how to make it, how to sell it, route to market, how to optimize, how to improve, as well as courses that just essentially help distillers be better at what they do, really easy, fun, accessible ways.
Love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What a great note to close on. For more than 30 years, G&D Chillers has had the proven solution for distilleries. Visit them today at gdchillers.com. And the MPE Granulizer is the precision roller mill that will change the way you approach distilling. Learn more at mpechicago.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, go to spiritsanddistilling.com and sign up for our free newsletter featuring new stories every week from some of the best writers and distillers in the distilling world. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another in-depth distilling conversation for you. Thanks for joining us. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Spirits and Distilling for those who love to make and drink great spirits. Join our free newsletter today at spiritsanddistilling.com for pragmatic, technical, and creative distilling stories in your inbox every week. Sign up now at spiritsanddistilling.com or click on the link in the show notes.